Name is Elise Harmon, and I'm 32 years old. For 10 years, I had been careful, deliberately, quietly, methodically careful about keeping my life separate from my family's reach. I thought I had succeeded. I was wrong. The knock came on a Wednesday morning in March while I was on a work call with a client in Seattle, a process server. No small talk, no apology for interrupting. He handed me a thick envelope, turned around, and left. I stood in the doorway of my apartment in Denver for a full minute before I could make myself open it. The words district court and petition for guardianship seemed to float off the page. My older brother and my parents had filed a legal action to have me declared unable to manage my own affairs. They were asking a judge to hand them full control over my finances, my property, my medical decisions. Every choice I'd made for myself in the past decade, they wanted to erase it, fold it back into something they could touch and direct and spend. At the time, I didn't know they'd been working on this for nearly 8 months. To understand how we got to a courtroom, you have to understand what my family looked like from the outside versus what it felt like from the inside. We grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona. My father ran a mid-sized commercial real estate firm, not empire level, but enough that we lived in a house with a pool, drove new cars every 3 years, and spent spring breaks in Sedona or Cabo. My mother volunteered on 3 nonprofit boards and treated every family gathering like a press opportunity. She had a gift for making life look effortless and curated, the kind of woman who sent holiday cards with professional photos and hand-addressed envelopes. My brother, older by 4 years, absorbed all of that. He went into my father's firm straight out of Arizona State, made junior partner by 30, and drove a truck my father co-signed. He wore the same signet ring my dad wore. At family dinners, they finished each other's sentences. My mother would look at him the way people look at something they built themselves and feel proud of. Then there was me. I was never the problem they said I was. I was just different from what they planned. While my brother was learning the difference between a cap rate and a gross yield, I was teaching myself video editing on a secondhand laptop. I was obsessed with content. Not in the influencer sense, but in the craft sense. How does a 30-second clip make someone feel something? How does a thumbnail make a stranger stop scrolling? I took every elective in digital media my high school offered, then switched my college major from business administration to communications and design my sophomore year without telling them until it was done. My father's reaction was flat. That's a hobby, not a career. He said it the way you'd note the weather. My mother added, softer but no less certain, we just want you to be stable, sweetheart. My brother, home for a weekend visit, didn't even look up from his phone. Good luck with that. The breaking point came at my parents' 4th of July party the summer before my senior year. It was the kind of event they held every year. 60 people minimum, catered, lights strung across the patio, my father's colleagues with their wives and their anecdotes about market cycles. I had just gotten my first paid freelance project, a small rebrand for a coffee shop in Tempe, $300, but I was so proud of it I could barely sleep. Somewhere between the appetizers and the fireworks, my father pulled me into a conversation I hadn't agreed to have. He was holding a glass of bourbon, talking to one of his partners, and he turned to me mid-sentence like an afterthought. Elise is experimenting with graphic arts, he said, with the particular smile people use when they're being dismissive in polite company. We keep telling her there's a real future in property management if she'd just apply herself. His partner chuckled. Someone's wife said, "Oh, how creative." The conversation moved on without me. I stood there with a plate of food I hadn't touched, 60 people talking around me, and the specific heat of being reduced to a punchline in my own family's story. No one said, "That's actually impressive for a college student." No one said anything at all. My mother caught my eye across the patio and gave me a small, apologetic shrug that somehow made it worse. I drove back to my apartment that night and didn't cry. I just started writing a list of everything I needed to do to make sure I never had to depend on them for anything. After graduation, I moved to Denver without asking for their opinion. I found a 1-bedroom in Cap Hill, cheap enough that I could afford it on freelance income while I built a client base. The first year was genuinely hard. I ate a lot of rice and beans. I had months where I invoiced more than I collected because clients paid late, and I had to negotiate my own rent deferral once in a bad stretch. I didn't call my parents for help. I didn't call at all, really, except for the obligatory holiday check-ins. But I kept going. I got better. I niched down into brand identity for food and beverage companies. I understood that space, I liked it, and it paid well once you knew what you were doing. My first major contract was with a regional brewery chain that needed a full visual rebrand. I charged $18,000 and delivered something they used on everything for 4 years. After that, referrals started coming without me chasing them. I was obsessive about money in a way that came directly from fear. Every month, I paid myself a salary, put a percentage into a Roth IRA, maxed my HSA, and invested the rest in a brokerage account I managed myself, index funds, some individual stocks in sectors I understood, nothing speculative. I tracked my net worth in a spreadsheet every quarter. When I hit 100K, I took myself to a nice dinner alone. When I hit 500K, I didn't tell anyone. By year 6, I had enough for a down payment on a property. I bought a duplex in the Sloan's Lake neighborhood. One unit I rented out, one I used as my home office while I kept my apartment 2 miles away. The rental income covered the mortgage and then some. I bought a second property the following year, a small commercial space I leased to a local bakery on a 5-year contract. Steady, boring, reliable income. The kind my father would have respected if it had come from him. My total net worth when the envelope arrived, just over $2.4 million. All of it built in 8 years, none of it inherited, none of it discussed with my family. I never posted about any of it. No, just closed on my second investment property content, no milestone posts. I'd seen what happened in my own family when money became visible. It became a negotiation, a leverage point, a reason to make claims. So I kept quiet and kept building. The price of that silence was that my family had no idea what I actually had. And when they finally came looking, they came with lawyers. The petition was 12 pages. I read it twice at my kitchen table with coffee going cold next to me. The allegations were specific and deliberately clinical. It claimed that I had exhibited patterns of social withdrawal and financial impulsivity, citing my decision to leave Scottsdale and pursue freelance work as evidence of poor judgment. It claimed I was at risk of exploitation by unverified business contacts. I still don't know what that means. There was a section about my limited family contact, framed not as a reasonable boundary I had set but as a symptom of instability, and woven through all of it was the implication that my assets, whatever they were, needed supervision. At the bottom, 3 signatures. My father's, my mother's, my brother's. I sat with it for about 20 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and searched for attorneys who specialized in contesting guardianship petitions in Colorado. I found Renata Stowe. Her firm had handled 3 high-profile cases in the past 5 years, where families had attempted to use guardianship proceedings to gain control over adult children who had distanced themselves. Her intake form asked, "Describe the pattern of control prior to the petition." That question alone told me she understood what this actually was. She called me the next morning. "Tell me everything," she said. "Not just the filing. I want to know what Thanksgiving looked like growing up." We met in person 2 days later at her office in Lodo. She was around 50, no nonsense, the kind of lawyer who doesn't soften things for comfort. She read the petition while I sat across from her, and when she looked up, her expression hadn't changed. "This is a financial play," she said. "The language about isolation and impulsivity is boilerplate they copied from elder abuse statutes, which tells me their attorney isn't particularly creative. What I need to know is why now? What changed on their end recently?" I didn't know yet, but she had a private investigator she worked with regularly, and within 10 days we had answers. My father's firm had been struggling for 2 years. A major commercial development deal had collapsed mid-escrow, taking a significant chunk of client money with it. There was a pending civil suit from a group of investors. His firm's credit lines were overextended. My brother had recently been passed over for full partner, partly, according to the investigator's sources, due to concerns about his judgment on a residential portfolio he'd managed badly. He had a lease on a $4,200 a month apartment in Scottsdale, and a car payment my father was quietly subsidizing. My mother had filed an insurance claim the previous year on a property that turned out to have some disputed circumstances. Nothing charged yet, but it was under review. "They're not worried about you," Renata said when she laid this out for me. "They're worried about themselves. You're liquid. You're unencumbered. And as far as they know, you're still the kid who left to play around with logos." The pieces settled into a shape I recognized. All those years of silence hadn't protected me the way I thought. It had just delayed this moment. We built the defense in 3 weeks. Renata was systematic. First, we documented my professional standing, my primary client, a national restaurant group I'd held a contract with for 4 years, provided a formal letter confirming our partnership and the annual revenue generated. Second, we addressed the isolation claim directly. My closest friend, someone I'd met at a design conference in Chicago 6 years earlier, who'd since become a genuine part of my daily life, agreed to provide an affidavit. She described our friendship in specific terms: road trips, group dinners with other creatives, the hiking weekend in Rocky Mountain National Park we'd done 3 weeks before the petition was filed. "You're one of the most intentional people I know," she told me when she signed it. "This is insane." On my end, I compiled a timeline, 8 years of bank statements, tax returns, client contracts, investment account summaries. I redacted the exact totals. I wanted that revealed in court, not in pre-discovery, where they could prepare a reaction. Renata filed a formal response, attached supporting documents, and scheduled depositions. She also requested that my assets be appraised independently and entered into the record in full. When she told me that last part, I understood what she was doing. "Let them hear it in the room," she said, "for the first time, in front of a judge." The morning of the hearing, I wore a dark blazer over a plain white shirt. Nothing flashy. Renata had coached me on exactly this. No jewelry that reads expensive, no new anything, just clean and composed. We arrived early. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Fluorescent lights, wooden benches, the low hum of an HVAC system working too hard for March. My family was already seated at the plaintiff's table. My father sat the way he always sat, straight, controlled, like he was billing by the hour. My mother had her hands folded on the table. My brother was leaned back slightly in his chair, and, when I walked in, he looked at me with the particular expression he'd been perfecting since we were kids. Calm confidence, like the outcome had already been decided. Their attorney, a man named Whitfield according to the case filings, was flipping through papers with the ease of someone who believed this would be over quickly. Judge Alderman entered and the room settled. He was older, gray-haired, with reading glasses he kept putting on and taking off. He called the session to order and gave each side equal time to present. Whitfield went first. He framed everything as concern. He called my mother to the stand and she cried on cue, not dramatically, just enough. She spoke about how hard it had been to watch me cut the family off, how she'd worried about me for years, how they'd tried to reach out and been met with silence. It was a performance, and it was polished. Because she'd been performing this version of events for so long, she probably believed parts of it herself. My father testified about financial risk in measured professional language. He cited his experience in real estate asset management. He spoke about the dangers of unsupervised financial exposure at an inexperienced level. He never once acknowledged that he'd never asked to see a single document of mine, never once tried to actually assess what he was calling a risk. Then my brother took the stand. Whitfield fed him easy questions and he leaned into them. He talked about my instability, my pattern of avoidance, my refusal to accept help from people who knew better. His voice carried just enough edge to reveal something. He wasn't worried about me. He was angry at me for leaving, for not being manageable, for having something he didn't. Renata's cross-examination was clean and devastating. With my mother, you state Elise is socially isolated. Can you name one attempt in the past 5 years to visit her in Denver? A pause. No. With my father, you testified about financial risk. Have you reviewed a single financial document of hers at any point in the past 8 years? Another pause. No. With my brother, you describe her as financially impulsive. What specific financial decisions are you referring to? He named nothing. He pivoted to tone, to attitude, to the way I'd always resisted guidance. Renata let it sit. Then came our witnesses. My client from the restaurant group testified remotely, professional background, clear screen, direct answers. He described our 4-year contract in concrete terms, the scope of work, the consistent delivery, the revenue my firm had generated for their brand. It was the testimony of a man describing a colleague he respected. My friend took the stand in person. She was calm and specific. She described our last 3 trips together, Name the other people in our social circle. Describe the group chat that had about a dozen people in it. She brought printed photos as supplementary evidence, her idea, not Renata's. Bianca has a full life, she said plainly, and then corrected herself with a small laugh. Sorry, Elise. She has a full life. That's what I came here to say. Then Renata addressed the court directly. Your Honor, the defense requests that the independently appraised asset summary be read into the record in full. Judge Alderman nodded. The clerk picked up the bound document. Primary residence. Condominium in Denver's Lodi neighborhood, purchased 6 years prior, fully paid. Appraised value $680,000. The first shift happened across the table. Small. My mother's posture changed. Duplex property, Sloan's Lake, Denver, generating rental income of $3,400 per month net. Current appraised value, $890,000. My father's hands resting on the table went still. Commercial property, leased to operating business on long-term contract. Appraised value $520,000. My brother's expression was doing something complicated. He was working through arithmetic in real time. Investment portfolio brokerage and retirement accounts combined. Current value $1,100,000. The room was very quiet. Total independently verified net worth $3,190,000, accumulated over 8 years of self-employment, with no inherited assets, no family loans, and no outstanding personal debt. My brother stood up. I don't think he meant to. I think his body just moved before his brain caught up. His chair scraped back hard and he pointed across the aisle at me, voice climbing fast. You've been hiding all of this. You sat there for years letting us think. He cut himself off and started again, louder. That's my family's money. That property belongs to all of us. We built the foundation that made this possible and you owe. Mr. Harmon, Judge Alderman's voice was flat and immediate. My brother didn't stop. He took 2 steps toward our table and said, clearly in a courtroom with a microphone and a court reporter and a bailiff, when this is over, I'm taking the duplex. That was always going to come back to the family. My mother put her hand on his arm. My father said something sharp and quiet. Whitfield stood and said, Your Honor, my client. But the judge was already nodding to the bailiff. They removed my brother from the room. He was still talking when the door closed behind him. Judge Alderman took less time than I expected. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't editorialize beyond what the record required. He looked at both tables and spoke with the particular exhaustion of someone who had seen this kind of case before and had no patience left for it. The petition was denied, dismissed with prejudice. He stated for the record that the evidence presented demonstrated a pattern of financial competence that directly contradicted every claim made in the filing. He noted that the petitioners had made no documented effort to assess the respondent's well-being through any legitimate means, no visits, no professional evaluations requested, no communication attempted through appropriate channels, and that the timing of the filing corresponded precisely with documented financial distress on the petitioner's side. This court exists to protect vulnerable adults, he said. It does not exist to redistribute assets between family members who feel entitled to a share of someone else's work. He ordered full reimbursement of my legal fees. He imposed court sanctions for bad faith filing, and he referred the matter for a formal review of whether the petition had been filed with fraudulent intent. Renata leaned over and said nothing. She just briefly put her hand on my arm. We walked out into the hall. The fluorescent lights out there were the same as inside, but somehow the air felt different. I stood by a window that looked out onto Colfax Avenue. Taxis, a food truck, the ordinary midday movement of a city going about its business. And I let myself exhale for the first time in 3 weeks. My friend was waiting outside the building. She'd come to watch the later part of the hearing, and she pulled me into a hug the second she saw me. Tell me everything, she said. I started to and then laughed instead because I didn't know where to begin. We went to a diner around the corner. Eggs and coffee at 2 in the afternoon. I recapped the whole thing and she kept shaking her head slowly. Not in disbelief but in the particular way people shake their heads when something confirms what they already knew. Renata called that evening. The referral for fraud review had been accepted, she said. Rest, you've done everything right. Let this next part move on its own. The fallout happened in stages. My brother's outburst in court was public record. Within 2 weeks, the commercial real estate firm where he worked as a junior associate had terminated his contract. The official language cited conduct inconsistent with firm values. He'd made statements in a courtroom claiming entitlement to property that wasn't his. No firm dealing in high-value assets wants that story attached to their name. My father's firm came under increased scrutiny following the fraud referral. The existing civil suit from his investors gained a new motion. 2 of his business partners quietly began the process of dissolving their shared ventures. His license status moved to under review pending the Bar Association's inquiry. My mother stopped sending me emails the week after the hearing, then texts, then nothing. I don't know exactly what happened inside that house. I don't need to. I blocked every number, changed the settings on every account they had access to, sent a single letter through Renata's office notifying them that any future contact would be directed to legal counsel. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't be better said in writing with a professional present. The year after the hearing, I moved fully into my low-high condo and converted the second duplex unit into my studio. I hired 2 people, a project manager I'd worked with on a freelance basis for 2 years and a junior designer fresh out of Q Boulder who had a better eye than me for certain things and was honest about it, which I respected immediately. We pitched a national wellness brand and won, then a regional grocery chain, then a Chicago-based hospitality group that was expanding into Denver. The work got bigger, the team got steadier. I started having the kind of mornings I hadn't let myself imagine during the lean years. Coffee on the balcony, inbox manageable, calendar full of things I'd chosen to take on. My friend and I drove to Moab that October. 4 days, no itinerary, just desert and silence, and long conversations and the particular freedom of being somewhere genuinely beautiful, with someone who doesn't need you to explain yourself. We came back sunburned and laughing, and I remember thinking on the drive back, this is the life. Not the condo, or the portfolio, or the court ruling. Just this, driving through the mountains with someone who showed up for you when it mattered. Windows down, nothing owed to anyone. People ask me sometimes, when they hear pieces of this story, whether I regret cutting my family off so completely. Whether I wonder if it could have been different. I've thought about that a lot. The honest answer is no, not the decision itself. What I regret is the years I spent hoping they'd change. The mental space I gave them while I was building something they would later try to take. I should have been lighter. I should have let it go sooner, which is different from letting them in. Blood doesn't automatically mean loyalty, it doesn't mean safety. It doesn't mean the people who share your DNA will protect what you build or even be glad you built it. Some families celebrate your success. Mine saw it as an unclaimed resource. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it as something I know to be true the way I know other things that are simply facts, the way the market works, the way a good contract is structured, the way trust is earned slowly and broken quickly. You can grieve the family you didn't have while building the life you actually want. Those 2 things can coexist, they did for me. The duplex is fully occupied, the commercial lease renewed for another 5 years last spring. The agency turned 3 years old in January and we celebrated with a dinner at a restaurant in Reno, 8 people around a big table. Good food, too much wine, the particular noise of people who actually like each other. On the way home, I walked along the creek path behind my building, the way I do some nights when the weather's good. The mountains were still holding light at the edges even at 9 o'clock. I thought about that envelope arriving on a Wednesday morning, and the courtroom, and my brother's voice rising in a room where it could be recorded and held against him. I thought about all the years I'd been careful, and how that carefulness had worked, and how it had also almost not been enough. Then I thought about what came after, and I walked home. I think about the 4th of July party sometimes. The way my father said experimenting with graphic arts, like it was a mild embarrassment. The way the conversation just moved on without me, and how I drove home alone that night and made a list instead of crying. That list turned into 8 years of work, and that work turned into the thing my brother tried to claim in open court like it had always been half his. That's how cause and effect actually operates, not in dramatic reversals, not in movie moments, but in the quiet accumulation of choices that other people aren't watching. Every invoice I chased down, every month I paid myself a salary and invested the rest, every time I chose discipline over the easier thing. None of it looked like much in the moment, but it compounded. It kept compounding. And when the moment of real pressure finally came, all of it was sitting there in a bound document waiting to be read aloud. What I've come to understand is that integrity isn't something you perform when people are watching. It's the decision you make alone, at 11 at night, when no one is going to know either way. I kept my finances clean not because I anticipated a courtroom. I kept them clean because that's how I operated. Every tax return filed correctly. Every contract documented. Every asset titled properly. When Renata asked me to pull 8 years of records, I could do it in an afternoon. That's not luck. That's what it looks like when you've been living honestly in the small moments long before anyone asks you to prove it. And then there's the intelligence piece. Not raw cleverness, but the kind of practical, patient thinking that compounds over time the same way money does. I didn't know everything when I started. I learned index funds from free courses. I learned property investment from spreadsheets and mistakes. I asked questions from people who knew more than me, and I wasn't embarrassed about what I didn't know yet. The family I came from treated knowledge like status, something you either had or didn't, something that separated the serious people from the rest. That was never how I saw it. Every gap was just the next thing to figure out. But the thing that held all of it together, the part I underestimated when I was younger, was the willingness to keep going when it was genuinely hard. Not the romantic kind of hard, not the kind you post about. The ramen in a broken furnace kind of hard. The client ghosted your invoice kind of hard. There were months I questioned every decision I'd made. I didn't have a mentor pulling for me, or a family safety net, or anyone calling to check in. I had the list I made after that party, and the stubbornness to keep honoring it. When Judge Alderman dismissed the petition and referred my family for fraud review, I didn't feel triumphant the way I thought I would. I felt tired, and then relieved, and then something quieter. Like a door finally closing on a room I'd been trying to leave for a long time. My brother's voice echoing in that courtroom, claiming what I'd built, was the clearest confirmation I ever got that I'd made the right call leaving when I did. You don't build a life by waiting for people who diminish you to finally see your worth. You build it by deciding, at some ordinary moment, that their opinion is no longer the standard you're working toward.